This week, we have Nick Neuman, CEO of Casa, on the show. Casa basically provides a multi-location key authentication model for self-hosted digital asset wallets. Self-hosting is basically being the custodian for your own digital assets. Casa removes that single point of failure with a multi-signature framework. This is a theme which Nick discusses. What I like about this episode is that Casa delivers a relatively straightforward product, but contemplates the various nuances of doing so, as Nick describes. So why is having multiple key authorization important? Not only does it provide a protection against hacking, but it can save you from accidental loss, SIM swaps, and device failures. The list goes on. So I think everybody's going to get something out of this episode. Now, if you enjoy this episode, please tell your friends. I heard a podcast recently where they said, please give us good ratings if you like the podcast, but if you don't, just forget you ever tuned in. Hopefully nobody falls in that category. But with that, I bring in Nick Neuman from Casa. Welcome to the Encrypted Economy, where we look at the business of, regulation, and security for all things encrypted, digital assets, blockchain technology, privacy, and smart contracts. Hope you'll join us while we explore these forces that are shaping the economy. Hi, this is Eric Hess with the Encrypted Economy. On today's show, I have Nick Neuman from Casa, CEO of Casa, joining the show. Nick, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Eric. Really excited to be here.
Now, if you don't know about Casa, Casa is it's a key management service for wallets. And it's something that they originally were doing, I think, the Lightning nodes, right? And then you shifted into wallets.
We've always kind of had the key management product. That was our very first product at Casa. And then we branched out a little bit with the Casa node and experimented in late 2018 and 2019 with the Lightning Network. And then just at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we refocused the company and stopped doing the Casa node and then focused back on just key management.
Great. So, Nick, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into the crypto space.
Sure. So I actually started my career in finance. I was doing investment banking and private equity. And I learned a lot for the first few years of my career doing that, but eventually decided that it was a soul-sucking existence that I no longer wanted to live. And so I moved into the startup world, started working at startups, and initially worked in travel tech and really grew as a product manager at a travel tech company as my first startup job. And then after that, or while I was there, I got pretty interested in Bitcoin and crypto generally. And after a year of just spending all of my free time reading about all of these things, as happens to everybody when you're falling down the rabbit hole, I decided to go participate in a hackathon called ETH Denver. It was the first Ethereum Denver hackathon, and my team actually ended up winning that hackathon. And so that was how I got connected with Casa, which was just starting up. And Jeremy, the previous CEO of Casa, and Jameson Lopp reached out to me, and I joined up with them and a few other people and really decided to work on making private keys easier for everybody to manage and secure.
Excellent. So I asked my guests about a singular event that shaped your values. It could be just a little happenstance occurrence, but something that shaped who you are and has stuck with you since.
Sure. So this is something that happened actually relatively recently for me. It was in 2019, towards the end of the year. I was on vacation and driving from kind of one point to another. We happened to drive past some random high school, and they have those high school message boards out front. And what the message board said was something that really has stuck with me since then. And it was, who you will become is who you decide to be. And the reason that has stuck with me is because there can be a lot of pressure in building a startup, and especially transitioning into being the CEO of Casa right around that time. There's a lot of my own personal kind of anxieties and worries about, am I going to succeed in this role? And I kept going back to that high school message board in my mind and thinking like, okay, it's really in my control and it's all about the decisions that I make. And so each day I'm making a bunch of choices for myself. Everybody's making a bunch of choices for themselves. And each of those choices builds up and compounds to being who you are as a person. But you're always in control of every single one of those little choices, or almost always. And so what I keep going back to is, as long as I think I'm making the right little choices and right little decisions every step of the way, I'm going to be generally on the right track and doing the best thing that I can for my life, for Casa as a company, for our team, et cetera. And so whenever I'm feeling kind of a little overwhelmed or inadequate or anything like that, just like everybody feels at points in their life, I keep going back to that. And I think that's something that, even though I saw it relatively not too long ago, a year plus, it's something that has aligned with some of the values that maybe I couldn't quite put words to for a lot of my life. And so I think it's something that'll really stick with me for the rest of my life.
It's a great story. So why is key security important?
So a lot of people understand the big leap that Bitcoin has made in terms of economic policy, where it's sound money that has a supply cap. You don't have to worry about the actual value of your money being inflated away. There's this whole other piece of Bitcoin that's a core fundamental leap in Bitcoin technology around the ability to actually truly own your own Bitcoin and to be the only person that has control over it. And you do that by managing the cryptographic private keys that Bitcoin is built on. They're the foundation for all of the Bitcoin protocol. And so this is something that a lot of people who are new and coming into Bitcoin don't quite grasp right away. But once you get it, it's like a big light bulb that goes off, because it gives you actual ownership and control where nobody else is holding your Bitcoin for you. Only you are holding it. And so it's a lot more like an actual form of digital cash, not in the way that I would necessarily, want to go spend it at Starbucks every day, but in a way that if I have a $20 bill in my wallet, I'm the only person that can spend that $20 bill. And if I give you that $20 bill, the only way I'm getting it back is if you give it back to me. If I drop that $20 bill on the street, it's probably gone unless I can go back and find it. And so Bitcoin is very similar, but in a digital way. And it's all comes down to the keys that actually control that Bitcoin. And so the important thing to know, though, is that you have to protect these keys in a much different way than people are used to protecting digital information. So a lot of people are used to passwords, where you have your passwords, and if you forget your password, you can just hit the forgot password button and reset it. With a private key, that's actually impossible to do, which is what builds all of Bitcoin security from the ground up, is that it's impossible to crack a private key. But that said, if you lose a private key, it's gone forever. So when you're managing Bitcoin keys, you have to be really careful that you don't make a mistake and lose a key, because that lost key means lost Bitcoin. That's where Casa has really built our business. We've built our business around helping make it easier for people to have really great security for their private keys.
Right. And also, so there's the security in terms of storage, and then also security in terms of transacting.
Yeah, and they're really two sides of the same coin. There's security. It's all about securing those private keys. And then those private keys are actually used to send funds when you want to. So a private key or multiple private keys can control a pool of Bitcoin. And then when you go to send that Bitcoin, you're approving that transaction with those private keys. When you are not sending the Bitcoin, you're in a way kind of storing it. That's like the easiest way to think about it. You're storing it with those keys, but really it's living on the blockchain. And then you're just using those keys to authorize actually moving money when you need to. And so it's incredibly important to make sure that you have the right kind of setup for your keys so that you don't ever lose access to actually transacting with your Bitcoin.
Right. So I'm going to give you a softball because we already talked about it. Do you know any high profile examples of people who've lost access to their keys?
Yeah. So I think I got sent this New York Times article by about 10 of my friends that are not in Bitcoin. And everybody in the Bitcoin industry received this like a few weeks ago when it came out. But yeah, so there was the recent New York Times article about Stefan Thomas, who lost hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And really what that means is that he had his Bitcoin private keys on a computer, and he had encrypted the access to those private keys. So he basically blocked it with a password. And then he forgot that password. And so since it was all under his control, there's no forgot password button. And he's got, I think if I remember the story right, he's got like 2 tries left on the password before the hard drive wipes itself. And so this happened a long time ago, actually. Like he realized, 5+ years ago that he had lost this Bitcoin. And the reason for that is because when Bitcoin initially started, there just wasn't the software and the solutions built up around private key security and management. And so people were doing it themselves, putting their keys on encrypted hard drives. It was kind of the Wild West of key management at the time, which is why we hear so many stories of people losing their keys and losing a bunch of Bitcoin, because it comes from the early days of Bitcoin. And so Casa was really built to provide the best practices, the user experience, and really make it a product that feels great to use to manage your keys so that this exact kind of thing doesn't happen.
Right. I think he got it when Bitcoin was like $2 per. And I think he did it because he did a video. Right. What is Bitcoin?
He got paid this amount of Bitcoin for doing a video, exactly that. And when he realized he lost it, I believe it was only worth like $1,000, or it wasn't worth very much. And so I think that was also part of the reason why he was maybe being a little less careful with those keys, was because he was thinking, okay, well, this is basically like pocket change. But obviously that grew to be a whole lot more in the future. And so that's actually one of the things that we say. It's kind of a joke, but kind of true at Casa, is like, protect your 30K BTC like it's 300K BTC, because who knows what the value of the Bitcoin that you have today will be 5-10 years from now. So make sure that you have the right private key management practices in place so that you can actually hold on to that value for that long period of time.
So Casa has a few different structures for managing the keys, which I think it makes a lot of sense. Do you want to walk us through how it's structured? I think it goes from like very convenient to very secure, and also be interesting along the way to indicate what you see in terms of your customers, what kind of customers are asking for.
Yeah, totally. So we've really tried to make self-custody, which is the kind of general term for securing your Bitcoin private keys yourself, rather than allowing somebody like a Coinbase to do that for you. We have really tried to make self-custody approachable for all types of people. So we start out at the very low end with just the free mobile app version of Casa. And this is just a single key Bitcoin wallet that lives in your phone's secure element. This is for somebody who's just getting started in Bitcoin, or somebody who is maybe they've got some more secure setups for a large amount of their Bitcoin, but they treat this more like an actual wallet where they hold like a few $100s worth that they want to spend at some point. So the way that this works is you just download the app, open it up. It automatically generates the key, saves it to your phone's secure element. Casa doesn't have access to it, and it makes it really simple for you to start sending and receiving Bitcoin. But where that kind of falls down is that once you start to have higher values of Bitcoin, $5,000 worth of Bitcoin, $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, you start to need better security, because if anything were to happen to that single key, or even if somebody was just able to get a hold of your phone and get past your Face ID or your PIN or whatever, they could take that Bitcoin. Or if you lose that key, you could actually lose that Bitcoin. And so we've really worked on higher security levels that can help people once you have more value at stake. So once you have more value in your Bitcoin, you need to start thinking about better security methods for it. And so this is where we get into what's called multi-sig, which is basically like 2FA for your Bitcoin. And so at our next level up, we have a 2 of 3 key set. This basically means that you have, instead of just one key protecting your Bitcoin, you have 3 keys. And you need 2 of those 3 keys to actually approve any transaction or any sending of Bitcoin. And so the way that this works in Casa for most of our users at this level is they have 1 key on their phone. 1 key is on a hardware wallet, such as like a Trezor or a Ledger. And then 1 key is held by Casa for emergencies. So let's say you're going to send some Bitcoin out of that wallet. You will start the transaction in the Casa app on your phone. You'll approve it from your phone's key. And then you'll also go approve it from your hardware wallet. And it's an offline device that you keep separately. So the benefit that this gives you is that it's a little bit more of a check on sending Bitcoin. It requires a little bit, one more step to send Bitcoin, which is helpful if somebody were to steal your phone or something like that. But it also means that if you ever lose one of those keys, you don't lose access to your Bitcoin. And this is the really important part for the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people significantly overestimate the risk of theft and underestimate the risk of loss of their Bitcoin just due to making a simple mistake. Because we're all humans. We're all going to make mistakes, right? And so if you lose a single key, you want to make sure that that doesn't mean you lost access to your Bitcoin. So in this 2 of 3 setup, let's say you lost the hardware wallet key. You still have the key on your phone and the key held by Casa, which can then help you recover those funds, re-add a new hardware wallet and transfer them into that new key set. And so this is something that we've made super simple in the app, where we've made it really easy. Just you follow everything the app tells you to do. Feels like any kind of normal, it's like using, Facebook on your phone today. It's very simple and straightforward. And then the next level up above that is really for people that are storing large amounts of Bitcoin. It's a 3 of 5 key set, which means you have 5 total keys and you need 3 of them to send. The benefit here is that now you can actually lose 2 keys at the same time without losing access to your Bitcoin. And losing 2 keys at one time is just incredibly difficult from a random chance kind of perspective, probability. And so along with this level, we also have our client service team, which is basically like a private banker for Bitcoin. You've got somebody who's there to walk you through everything from start to finish if you need that. Somebody who is there to help you with things, or your family with things like emergency protocols if you lose a key, or at our highest level to help you with things like inheritance, so that you can actually still maintain control of your keys while you're alive, but not have to worry about how does my wife or how do my kids get access to this Bitcoin if I were to suddenly pass away. And so that's really the breakdown of Casa's offerings. And we try to make it a ramp so that somebody can start with just the simple free Bitcoin wallet and then over time move up their security levels as the value of their Bitcoin increases.
So from an inheritance perspective, I always wonder, let's say that I'm the Bitcoin guy in my house and I pass and nobody in my house really knows how to do it. If I've done this, how do you engage? Like, what's the process for somebody when you pass on the Bitcoin, somebody actually knowing to gain access to it, right? Because you might be dealing with one person who kind of understands it, whereas others would not.
Yeah, so this is really where our client service team comes into play when we're getting this set up with our clients who hold a lot of Bitcoin. We're bringing their family into the picture and making sure that they understand how private keys work, how Casa works. We're actually bringing their estate lawyer into the picture and making sure that Bitcoin is actually part of the estate planning process. And the key is to make sure that 3 of the keys are actually accessible to the heirs through the legal system after somebody passes away. And so what that means is basically that typically we have one key. There's always one key that's held by Casa, which, upon a court order from like a proof of death certificate, we can sign with that as part of the estate plan. There's one key typically that people hold in a safety deposit box. And that safety deposit box is accessible by the same court order after proof of death. And then the last key that they will need in this scenario is one that's typically held by actually like their estate lawyer or somebody else, like some other professional who works with the legal system in the estate planning process. And in this scenario, that gives you 3 keys, which are each used to transfer the funds to the account of the person's choosing afterwards. And so then a lot of times what we'll have set up is an agreement with the actual people that are named as heirs, where they'll get a Casa account that they can use, and we'll walk them through setting all of that up to actually make sure that they have that Bitcoin secured properly and understand what they're doing. But that's something that we're really the only company out there right now enabling self-custody plus inheritance. And I think it's just a really important piece that has so far been overlooked by everybody who's kind of in this, who understands the importance of holding your own keys, but has really been taking this approach of either a very DIY kind of hodgepodge setup for their inheritance, or they're just taking the approach of, well, I'll deal with that later and hope something bad doesn't happen in the meantime. So we're really trying to take a proactive approach for this with our clients.
Great. So I think in one of your interviews, you said that the product was inspired by the Glacier Protocol.
Yeah. So the Glacier Protocol is a open source kind of super hardcore security protocol for holding your own Bitcoin keys. And it involves using air-gapped laptops, which means you buy a laptop and like take out the Wi-Fi chip and do all these things to make sure that it never connects to the internet. And then you're passing private key material back and forth between computers with USB sticks and signing transactions that way. It's just a very complicated process that honestly, the average person wouldn't be able to do. And a technical person, it would take them probably a solid couple of days if they're splitting up the time over a couple of days to do.
And not very conducive to inheritance.
No, not at all. Good luck getting your family to work that system. And so we kind of took this idea of the Glacier Protocol, which said, all right, you're having multiple keys protecting your one pool of funds, and those are on offline devices, and made that a little bit simpler where we're using hardware wallets instead of air-gapped computers, and you're actually using Casa as the central coordinator here so that you don't have to do all of that work yourself of transferring key material, signing transactions, et cetera. It's all handled through Casa's software. So that was the kind of initial basis, though, for Casa's 3 of 5 multisig was the Glacier Protocol.
So at the beginning, you talked a little bit about how in the Bitcoin community, there's sort of this idea of that you own it, that you have it in your wallet. Can you contrast it with centralized custodians? Like, what do you think the real risks are in utilizing a centralized custodian versus self-custody? Like, how do you think people should sort of view the choice?
So I think that the first thing I'll say is I think that there will always be a choice between self-custody and central custodians. It won't be a winner-take-all type of scenario. There's going to be certain reasons to hold your Bitcoin with Coinbase and certain reasons to hold your Bitcoin with Casa, which is holding it yourself. But it'll always have both options. And so it's about evaluating the risks and trade-offs, like you were saying. So the risks of a central custodian, basically the way it works is that Coinbase has a certain X number of private keys. They're usually using multisig themselves. And I'm using Coinbase illustratively here. This applies to all custodians that are doing their job well. They typically have a pool of basically Bitcoin that is stored offline using multi-sig the exact same way, oftentimes, that Casa does multi-sig. So we're giving these kind of institutional tools to the average individual, but they're holding it in a multi-sig, and then there's some amount of Bitcoin that's held online from a different key. But the point is that your Bitcoin is not held by one key, like one key. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. You don't have your own individual wallet. Your Bitcoin is kind of commingled with all this other Bitcoin from other users, and that is all kept track of in a database. So there's two risks here that people can run into. One of them that we've seen year after year happen multiple times every year is the risk of hacks. So since all the Bitcoin is actually pooled together into like a smaller group of keys, it creates what's called a honeypot, which means that if a hacker gets access to those keys, they can steal a lot of people's Bitcoin at once. And this makes it a high value target and worth the effort versus trying to hack somebody who has maybe a few Bitcoin on their own key set. It's just not worth it. And so, for example, I think in 2019, Binance got hacked for like $40 million worth of Bitcoin or something like that. And so that's something where that's a risk that your Bitcoin is actually hacked from an exchange. Another risk is that somebody guesses the password to your exchange account and is able to go in and sweep out the Bitcoin, and you have no recourse. And then finally, there's really what I would call censorship risk, which can mean a wide variety of things. So for people in countries that live under like corrupt governments, for example, self-custody is really the only option, but it's a real important option for somebody who could actually have their bank account locked up completely by the government. So I think I actually saw something earlier today where there was just that coup in Myanmar.
Fun fact, I actually snuck into Myanmar illegally in the back of a pickup truck in the late 80s.
What were you sneaking into Myanmar for?
So I went to this town. This is your podcast, by the way, but I'll tell the story anyway. I went to a town where the Bridge over the River Kwai the movie was based on, or the book was based on. I was in college. I was taking a beat around Southeast Asia, and they said, "Hey, we're going to go into Myanmar, but you got to jump in the back of a pickup truck and go under a tarp because we're not supposed to be there." So I was like, "Oh, that's all I needed to hear." So I was there, and we went to a town in the rebel territory, and I remember there were gun turrets and guards, and we slept on a floor. A Chinese family took care of a bunch of us that had come, and I spoke Chinese, so I wanted to, as crazy as it sounds, I wanted to go on a gun run because I thought it would be really cool, and I thought I could write an article and I could get it published. And the Chinese woman went to great lengths to foil my plan, and she succeeded. Yeah. And I didn't even really fully understand it till after I left, how much she had really, because to the rebels, having a stupid American was like camouflage. Like, why wouldn't I want an American? If we get caught, they can't do anything. They're not going to kill an American. It was like, it would be fun. But fortunately, she wasn't having any of it. So that's my little complete tangent thrown into the podcast. But there you have it.
Wow. That's pretty cool, though. That's a great story. Okay. So in Myanmar, I think I saw earlier today that they'd locked down ATMs and people couldn't withdraw their money out of the ATM. And so there's a similar risk of this for using a custodian for your Bitcoin. You lose the ability to always have control over your Bitcoin. And I have heard stories of people having their account locked with X or Y exchange and not being able to access their money for a long time while they're trying to work it out with customer support, and their accounts being locked, sometimes due to a mistake. It's not even like this person is a bad person. It's doing something bad with their Bitcoin. It's like they're a normal person, bought some Bitcoin, and they got locked out of their account, and now they can't access it for months while they're trying to work through customer support. And so those are some of the risks of having a central custodian hold your Bitcoin. And so what we're trying to do at Casa is really give people that choice to have self-custody and to do it in a way that's easy and to do it in a way that's safe. Whereas previously that didn't really exist. Somebody non-technical would have to use a Coinbase to hold their keys for them because there was too big of a risk that they would lose their Bitcoin if they were doing it themselves. And so those are some of the trade-offs of using a custodian for your Bitcoin, or some of the risks, really.
Well, it certainly sounds like a very important part of the ecosystem. So
in our opinion, it's kind of like you could rebuild the existing banking system where you put your dollars in a bank and the bank holds onto it for you, maybe lends it out and makes money themselves on that. You'd rebuild that on top of Bitcoin, and yeah, it would probably work just fine. But the way that you really unlock the value and the revolution behind Bitcoin is by allowing people to hold it themselves, to be their own banks. And so that's something that Casa is really focused on. And that's why we think it's a very important part of enabling Bitcoin adoption.
And sort of the DeFi vision of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, I think the decentralization of Bitcoin is what gives it so much of its power, right? What really gives Bitcoin as a technology, as a movement, the resilience and staying power that it has today is its decentralization. If some bad government wanted to shut down Bitcoin, they literally couldn't today because there's so many different people that are contributing by running a node or by mining. And that same concept applies to self-custody. Let's say the US government tomorrow decides they want to ban Bitcoin, and they call up all the major custodians, the 5 biggest custodians in the industry, and say, hey, we're seizing all the Bitcoin on your exchange. We'll pay all of the users of your exchange the value of that Bitcoin, but that Bitcoin is ours now. That is basically impossible to operationally carry out if you have people self-custodying, because the ability to actually go and knock on every single door of somebody who owns Bitcoin and try to get them to give it back is just extremely time intensive, expensive, and just I highly doubt it would work. And so there is some resiliency from that angle, and decentralization really helps from that perspective for sure. And that's not to say that I expect the US government to ban Bitcoin. I think that fear is actually way overblown, especially given some of the institutions that we've seen move into it this year. But it's to illustrate an example of it just makes it way harder to seize Bitcoin en masse if a lot of people are self-custodying.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, on a lighter scale, you could also envision there's a lot of attention to custodian rules and whether custodians should be regulated, and the implications of that relatively unknown at this point. I mean, we can make certain guesses, and that certainly makes it more reportable and less private. Obviously, Bitcoin is not like Monero or Zcash, but still, there's something to be said for that. So going forward, what is the vision for Casa? How do you see your wallet solution evolving? Is that the solution? Are you thinking about integrating with layer 2? Is it bigger? What's the grand view?
I think I like to look at this in multiple stages. So the near-term stage continues to be, how do we make self-custody as easy as possible and as safe as possible for as many people as possible? That's really the base foundation where we're starting here. And that's what we continue to be really focused on in the very short term. The next step is looking at other things we can enable people to do with their Bitcoin. So like layer 2s are a good example of that. Like with Lightning, how can we allow people to use Bitcoin actually as a collateral, as a money type of asset to do different things in their life? And so that could be like the ability to earn yield on your Bitcoin, the ability to get a loan using your Bitcoin as collateral. There's a bunch of different things that you can do there that are really interesting, especially for people who have owned Bitcoin for a long time and for whom Bitcoin may be like a large portion of their net worth. And then from there, kind of zooming out to a much larger picture, is that we really believe that private keys are one of the most fundamental, large, and impactful technologies that have been invented in the last they're very old. They've been around for decades, but have really been being used in a different way with Bitcoin and being introduced to people in a new way. And we think that they have the potential to be incredibly impactful for people everywhere around the world in giving them the ability to actually have ownership over more than just their money through cryptocurrency. So right now, private keys let people have ownership over their money. We think that there's a lot more applications where private keys are going to be incredibly important for people as more and more of our lives go online. So this moves into things like digital identity being protected with private keys, your communication being encrypted by private keys. And we're already seeing that start to happen with the increased adoption of apps like Signal. And so I think that on a very long time horizon, what Casa is building at our core is a private key manager. We're really the first, we call it a personal key manager ever created. And so that has very wide ranging effects over a long time period where we can actually help people to truly own everything in their life that's most important to them. That's their money, their identity, their communications, their personal data. And we think this unlocks a world of individual sovereignty that is really a defense against this encroachment of constant kind of spying on our lives by big tech or by governments, depending on what government you live under. And so it's something that we think will be really important for the future as more and more of our lives go digital.
So for example, every time I open an account, there's so much talk about privacy, but yet there's also the competing concern of AML, which seems right. At times from a consumer, it seems completely the opposite, right? It's like we're living in a world of increased privacy, but yet
we're going to collect more and more data on you.
We're going to collect more and more data. You can't open an account unless I get your passport, your license, all these different pictures. And it's sort of like, oh my God, right? And so certainly you could see a world where all that information would be secured on a key. And then I guess you could even integrate with like a zero knowledge proof, like where basically the other side doesn't even have to see it, but they can inquire into the existence of it in a secure format or something like that, or secure multi-party SMPC, secure multi-party computation.
Yeah, I think zero knowledge proofs are really interesting. And I'm excited to see that technology grow in its application, especially in areas like identity, where I think the ability to prove a specific thing about yourself with a zero knowledge proof without giving all of your personal information away is really interesting. And I think it will be, if we do things right as a general community, I think it'll be really important for identity in the future. It's like that classic example of zero knowledge proof usage where you walk up to the bar and they want to check that you're 21. And instead of giving them your entire ID, which contains your full name, your home address, everything like that, you're able to cover everything up except for the birthday and just show them that you're 21. Or you don't even have to show them your birthday. You just say, yes, I am 21, and it's cryptographically provable. And so something like that is really interesting from the zero knowledge proof perspective.
Yeah, so I could definitely see that being another stage for sure. So thanks for coming on the show, Nick. This was great to learn about all the different ways to secure your wallet when you're custodying it yourself, and the vision going forward. Definitely interested in seeing how you guys execute and continue to grow on it. So best of luck to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it.
Now, if somebody wants to contact you or learn more about Casa, where can they go?
Yeah, so our website is keys.casa. That's keys.casa. And then on Twitter, which is where we put out most of our, educational content and announcements, etc., we're at Casa Hodl. So that's CASAHODL. And so either of those are a great place to find us. You can sign up for an account on our website, or you can just download our app directly to use the free mobile wallet, and that's keys.casa/download.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.